When I picked up the phone to ask my son Ethan about the date of his wedding, my daughter-in-law Clara stared at me with a frosty smile and said, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." The words cut through me like ice. Special people. For 3 years, I have been the one paying their $500 rent every month, furnishing their entire apartment, and stocking their fridge when they had nothing. Yet I was not special. I stood frozen in my own living room, clutching the phone that suddenly felt like it weighed a ton. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes while Clara lounged on the sofa I had bought for them. In my closet, a pale lavender dress I had carefully chosen for the wedding still hung unused, along with new shoe symbols of a day I thought I'd share but never would. Had spent $200 on that dress, imagining myself smiling in Ethan's wedding photos in which I would never appear. For weeks, I had set aside money to gift them $1,000 for their marriage. I had even called my sister Marianne in Denver to share the joy, cleaned every corner of my house, and prepared for them to stop by after the ceremony. All of those dreams collapsed in a second, buried under those 4 venomous words, "Only special people." Finally, Ethan looked up and muttered in a practiced voice, "Mom, it was just a small thing, very intimate. Only us and the witnesses." But I already knew the truth. I had seen the photos online. Clara's parents were there, smiling proudly. Her siblings toasted with champagne. Clara's white gown, partly paid for with the $800 I had given her just last month, shown in those pictures. I had seen everything I wasn't supposed to see. Exactly a week after that humiliation, Clara called me again, but this time her voice had none of the arrogance I'd heard before. She sounded anxious, almost begging. "Helen, the rent is overdue. The landlord says if we don't pay this week, he'll evict us." "You forgot to make the transfer?" Her tone trembled, as if the world was ending. I sat in silence for a few moments, remembering all the times I had rushed to the bank to cover their rent. All the evenings I had canceled my own plans so they would have a roof over their heads. All the meals of rice and beans I had endured so that they could enjoy more. And now, after excluding me from the most sacred day of their lives, she dared to call as if nothing had happened. "Clara," I said with a calmness that surprised even me. "Didn't I once warn you that I only help special people?" The silence that followed was so deep, I could hear my own heartbeat. For the first time in years, it wasn't me trembling, it was her. "Helen, I don't understand," she stammered. "We've always been special to you. You're like a second mother to me." Lies. Empty words sugar-coated with the same sweet voice she always used when she needed money. The same voice she used when she asked for help with the wedding gown, the honeymoon, the rings, all of which I had contributed to, never realizing I wouldn't even see the moment those rings were exchanged. For years, I had walked on eggshells, measuring every gesture, every word, every gift, hoping for a shred of affection from my own son. I was the perfect mother, the compliant mother-in-law, the silent provider who never objected when they treated me like I was invisible, but those words, "only special people," awakened something inside me that had been buried too long. That night, I calculated in my head just how much I had spent on them over the past 3 years. Rent, groceries, gifts, emergencies, indulgences, it all added up to more than $20,000. $20,000 taken from my retirement savings, from the nest egg my late husband had left me so I could live out my years in peace. And for what? To be treated like a stranger at my own son's wedding. That night, after hanging up, I sat on my bed and wept. But the tears weren't of sorrow. They were tears of rage, of years of humiliation finally breaking loose. I wept for every moment they made me feel my love was a burden, my presence a nuisance, and my money the only part of me that mattered. I wept for the foolish mother I had become, chasing crumbs of affection. while sacrificing everything. When morning came, something inside me was different. When dawn broke, I rose from my bed feeling a shift inside me. It wasn't just the sting of betrayal anymore, it was something colder, sharper. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The same weary eyes, the same lines etched by decades of giving without expecting anything back. But there was something new in my gaze, a hardness I hadn't seen before. A quiet determination that had been buried under years of silence and compliance. I brewed my morning coffee, just as I had done for 40 years. But this time, I didn't think of calling Ethan to ask if he had slept well. I didn't check my phone, waiting for a message that would never come, an apology that had never once crossed their minds. For the first time in a long time, I placed myself at the top of my own list of priorities. I sat at the dining table where I had so often planned surprises for them, counted out bills for their needs, and cried silently after their indifference. That morning, the table served a different purpose. I pulled out my checkbook, my bank statements, and began adding numbers with cold precision. $500 rent for 36 months. $18,000, groceries and supplies. About $200 monthly, $7,200. Gifts for birthdays. Anniversaries and Christmas is only $3,000, Clara's. Medical emergencies, $800. The car loan they never repaid, $2, $500. An air conditioner. Repair, $600. Living room furniture, $120,033,400. That was the exact cost of my so-called generosity. $30,3,400 pulled from my husband's inheritance, my pension, the savings I had guarded penny by penny through decades of hard work, and in return, a lifetime of being overlooked, dismissed, and ultimately erased from the most important day of my son's life. The phone buzzed with Ethan's name flashing on the screen. My heart no longer leapt as it once would have. I let it ring until it fell silent. Minutes later, Clara's number lit up the phone. Again, I ignored it. A text followed. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk." I deleted it without replying. That afternoon, I laced up my shoes and went for a walk. Not to run an errand for them, not to deliver groceries or fetch prescriptions, but simply because I wanted to. I passed the park where I used to bring Ethan as a boy. I remembered his little arms clutching my neck, his words, "You're the best mom in the world." And I asked myself, when had that sweet boy turned into a man who saw me only as an ATM with feelings? When had I started confusing love with money? When had I convinced myself I had to purchase my own son's affection? As I walked past the familiar streets, I stopped in front of the bank. Through the glass door, I saw Mr. Larson, the branch manager who had processed every transfer I had ever made for Ethan and Clara. He waved at me kindly. For years, he had watched my account drain to keep theirs full. I walked inside with a steady step and went straight to his office. Double quotes, "Mr. Larson," I said. "I want to cancel all automatic transfers to Ethan and Clara, and I need advice on securing my accounts so that no one else can access my money." Mr. Larson blinked at me, startled. For 3 years, those transfers had gone out as regularly as the sunrise. "Are you certain, Mrs. Hayes? Did something happen?" he asked gently. His concern sounded more genuine than anything Ethan had shown me in months. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "What happened is that I finally opened my eyes. Cancel every transfer. And please help me protect my money. From now on, it belongs only to me." While he processed the cancellations, my phone buzzed nonstop on the desk beside me. Ethan, then Clara, then Ethan again. It was as if they could sense their lifeline slipping away. Without hesitation, I turned the phone completely off. "Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Larson said, sliding the papers across for me to sign. Forgive me if I'm overstepping, but in all these years, I've seen you be incredibly generous. I only hope you're not being pressured into this. His words pierced me because they came from a man who barely knew me outside of bank transactions. Yet his concern felt more real than the hollow affection of my own son. I'm not being pressured, I told him. For the first time in years, I've stopped pressuring myself. When I stepped out of the bank, I felt strangely weightless, as if I had set down a burden I'd carried too long. For the first time in years, my money was mine. I owed nothing to anyone who viewed me as a resource instead of a person. That afternoon, I sat in my living room and thought about all the things I had sacrificed for Ethan and Clara, the vacations I had never taken, the friends I had drifted away from, the hobbies I had abandoned. Every dollar I had spent on them had been stolen from my own life. When I pulled into my driveway later that day, my stomach clenched. 3 cars were parked in front of my home, Ethan's, Clara's, and one I didn't recognize. Through the window, I could see shadows moving inside. My blood went cold. They had keys. I had trusted them enough to hand over keys to my house, believing that one day they would take care of me as I had taken care of them. I took a long, steady breath and opened the door. What I saw inside made me freeze. Ethan sat slumped on my sofa, his head in his hands. Clara paced the room like a restless cat. And a man I didn't know, dressed in a gray suit, was rifling through my personal papers on the dining table. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice louder than I expected. They all looked at me as though I were the intruder in my own home. Clara rushed toward me, her voice dripping with forced concern. "Helen, thank God you're here. We need to talk. This is Mr. Franklin from the law firm. We consulted about your situation." "My situation?" I asked coldly. "What situation?" "I'm doing just fine." Ethan finally lifted his head. The innocence that had once lived in his eyes was gone, replaced with something desperate. "Mom, we went to the bank," he admitted. "They told us you canceled all the transfers, and Mr. Larson said you locked us out of your accounts. We don't understand why you do this." Mr. Franklin stepped forward, extending his hand with a lawyer's polished smile. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Attorney Franklin. Your children are deeply concerned about your well-being. They've asked me to assess your ability to manage your finances." I didn't take the man's hand. Instead, I walked straight to the dining table and gathered up every paper he had been sifting through without my permission. "These are my private documents," I said firmly. "You have no right to touch them." "Mom," Ethan interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension, "we're just worried about you. You've been acting strange. First, you cut us off financially without explanation. Then you stopped answering our calls. We think you might need professional help." Clara stepped closer, her face softened to a mask of false tenderness. She tried to take my hand, speaking in that syrupy voice she always used when she wanted something. "Helen, sweetheart, we know you're under stress. Maybe the loneliness is harder on you than you realize. At your age, confusion is normal." That word confusion rang in my ears like a siren. Suddenly, it all became clear. They weren't here to help me. They were here to paint me as unstable, to strip me of my independence and take over everything I had. "I'm not confused," I declared, my voice sharper than it had been in years. "In fact, I see more clearly now than I ever have. And all of you are going to leave my house immediately." Mr. Franklin raised his hands in mock reassurance, his tone calm but calculated. "Mrs. Hayes, please. I understand you feel defensive, but your children have the legal right to intervene if they believe your decision-making is impaired. They've documented several concerning behaviors." "Concerning behaviors?" A bitter laugh escaped my throat. "Like deciding that my money is mine? Like refusing to keep financing 2 grown adults who treat me like garbage?" Clara flinched as though I had slapped her. "We never treated you badly. You are family. Everything you own will belong to us one day anyway. We're just accelerating the process. There was the naked truth. To them, I was already gone. My years, my breath, my presence, they meant nothing. All they saw was the inheritance waiting like fruit on a branch. Out, I said, pointing at the door. All of you. Out of my house. Ethan rose, his face twisted in anger, the same petulant look he'd worn as a child when denied what he wanted. Mom, we can't just leave. We have responsibilities. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you co-signed. How do you expect us to manage without your help? You can't just cut us off overnight, can't? I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. Who says I can't? For years, I've paid rent that wasn't mine. I filled a fridge in a house where I wasn't welcome. I financed a life that had no place for me. And you dare tell me I can't stop? Mr. Franklin calmly placed a folder on the table. Mrs. Hayes, we've prepared documents to make this easier. A power of attorney allowing Ethan and Clara to manage your finances just temporarily until you feel better. Without even opening it, I snatched the folder and tossed it straight into the trash bin. The only transition happening here, I said coldly, is yours to the front door. Clara's eyes welled with tears, but I knew those weren't tears of sorrow. They were the furious, frustrated kind that come when manipulation fails. You can't do this to us, Helen, she cried. We were counting on you. We made plans based on your support. We bought things, signed contracts because we knew we could rely on you. Rely on me? I shot back. No, you relied on my money. Not on my company, not on my love, not on my well-being. Only on the dollars I handed you. And now that I've chosen to spend them on myself, suddenly I'm a confused old woman who needs to be put under guardianship. Ethan tried to approach, but I stepped back. The boy who had once run into my arms during thunderstorms was gone. In his place stood a 35-year-old man who looked at me not as a mother, but as an obstacle standing between him and a free ride. Mom, he said, his voice low, as if rehearsed. We made mistakes. The wedding it was a misunderstanding. Clara was nervous. I was under pressure. We can fix this if you'll just be reasonable again. Reasonable? The word tasted like poison. Reasonable means funding your lives while you treat me like a stranger. Reasonable means pretending it didn't rip me apart to be excluded from the most important day of my only son's life. If that's your definition of reasonable, then thank God I've lost it. Mr. Franklin neatly gathered his papers, his face betraying no emotion. Mrs. Hayes, this isn't over. If your children believe you're suffering from mental decline, they have legal options. A judge could assign guardianship if he agrees. The threat hit me like a cold slap. This wasn't just family manipulation anymore, it was a legal ambush. They wanted me declared incompetent, stripped of my freedom, my dignity, and every dollar I had. I looked Franklin straight in the eyes. Then you had better do your homework. I am a 71-year-old woman who has managed her finances flawlessly for decades, who raised a son alone after my husband's death, who worked until retirement and supported herself honorably. If you think you can paint me as incompetent, you'll find I'm far more prepared than you expect. For the first time, Clara's tears dried and her mask slipped. Her face hardened into something cold and sharp. Her true self finally revealed. This won't end here, Helen, she hissed. We have rights and lawyers too. Perfect, I replied, my voice like steel. Pay for them with your own money, because mine is no longer available to fund your tantrums. The three of them shuffled toward the door with stiff, offended dignity. At the threshold, Ethan turned back one last time. Mom, he said bitterly, this is going to end very badly for you. You'll be alone with no one to take care of you when you need it most. I looked at him with both sadness and clarity. Ethan, I already am alone. The difference is, now it's by choice, not because of your neglect. I closed the door behind them, and the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in years. It wasn't emptiness. It was freedom. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from sadness, but from adrenaline. I lay awake, not broken but charged, like a soldier preparing for war. If Ethan and Clara wanted a battle, they would get one. But this time, I would fight with intelligence. Not blind devotion. At 6 a.m. I was already dressed and out the door. My first stop that morning was the office of Mr. Whitman, a lawyer I had met years earlier while handling my late husband's estate. Unlike Franklin, the vulture Ethan and Clara had dragged into my home, Mr. Whitman had a spotless reputation and a specialty in protecting seniors from abuse. I sat across from him in his oak-paneled office and laid everything out: the secret wedding, the exclusion, the financial drain, the invasion of my home, the threats of guardianship. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gravely, "what your son and daughter-in-law attempted is more common than you'd think. It's called elder financial abuse. And it is not just immoral, it is a federal crime. The fact that they entered your house and rifled through your documents without permission, that's also a violation of law." His words were both comforting and chilling. Comforting because they confirmed I wasn't losing my mind. Chilling because it meant this nightmare was far more serious than I had even imagined. "We'll need to document everything," Mr. Whitman continued. "Every transfer, every gift, every time they pressured you for money. We'll also update your will immediately to ensure your assets are protected from further manipulation." For 3 hours, we combed through my financial records. When Mr. Whitman tallied the final number, he let out a low whistle. $33,400 in just 3 years, he said. "Mrs. Hayes, you could have traveled the world, joined clubs, enjoyed your retirement. Instead, you carried 2 adults who didn't even respect you enough to invite you to their wedding." His words stung, but I needed to hear them. When I left his office, I carried more than just legal papers. I carried a plan. A plan for survival and for freedom. First, I would change every lock on my house. Second, I would install a full security system with cameras. Third, I would open a brand new account at a bank Ethan and Clara knew nothing about. And finally, I would begin living the life I had postponed for far too long. My next stop was the hardware store. Mr. Dalton, the owner, had known me for years. He'd seen me countless times, always buying supplies to fix Ethan and Clara's apartment. "What brings you in today, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked kindly. "Another emergency at your son's place." "No, Mr. Dalton," I answered, my voice steady. "This time it's for my house. I need new locks. The best quality you've got." He raised his brows but didn't ask questions. While he sorted through the options, his son Caleb, who installed security systems, came by. It felt like fate. "Caleb," I said, "I also need cameras installed. A full setup. Price doesn't matter." He nodded. "We can have it done tomorrow." As I was leaving, my phone rang from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Double quotes, "Helen, it's Clara. Please don't hang up. We need to talk like civilized adults." "Speak," I said, my tone flat. "I know you're angry about the wedding. It was a mistake. Ethan and I want to make it up to you. How about a special dinner? Just us at your house like old times. We can cook together, celebrate properly." Her words dripped with manipulation, so obvious it was almost laughable. "Clara," I asked calmly, "how much rent do you owe right now?" The silence on the other end told me everything. "Well, 2 months, she finally admitted. $1,000 total. But Helen, I'm not just calling for that. We really miss you. Do you miss me? I asked coldly. Or do you miss my money? There was a pause before she whispered, almost too honestly, both. I didn't let her continue. If I was so important, Clara, why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why wasn't I important enough to get a phone call that didn't involve money? When was the last time you asked me how I was? We both knew the answer. Never. Clara, I said, my voice sharp with finality. For 3 years, you treated me like an ATM with feelings. You used me, ignored me, humiliated me, and then you had the audacity to call me not special. Well, here's the truth. Now you're not special. Not anymore. I hung up before she could plead, and this time, I turned the phone completely off. It was my day of liberation, and I wasn't going to let her ruin it. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I went to the beauty salon. For months, I had canceled appointments whenever Ethan or Clara had some new emergency, always telling myself their needs mattered more than mine. Not today. The familiar bell over the door chimed as I stepped inside. Cynthia, my longtime stylist, looked up in surprise. Mrs. Hayes. What a shock. I thought you'd forgotten all about us. I smiled faintly. I didn't forget you, Cynthia. I just forgot that I deserved to be here too. I gave myself permission for the full treatment. Cut, color, manicure, pedicure. For the first time in years, I spent money on me without guilt gnawing at my chest. As Cynthia worked, she chatted about her kids, her hopes, her little joys. It struck me how refreshing it was to have a conversation that didn't revolve around Ethan and Clara's endless needs. When she finally spun me toward the mirror, she gasped softly. You look beautiful, Mrs. Hayes, but more than that, you look free. Did something wonderful happen? Yes, I said, my reflection staring back with fresh light in her eyes. I finally learned how to say no. When I arrived home later, I noticed a car parked at the curb. My heart clenched for a moment, fearing Ethan and Clara had returned. But as I got closer, I saw an older woman seated on my porch steps, holding a thermos in her hands. Mrs. Hayes. She called as I approached. Yes, that's me. Can I help you? She stood and offered a warm smile. I'm Eleanor Brooks. I live next door. We've been neighbors for years, but we've never really spoken. Yesterday, I heard shouting from your house and got worried. Are you all right? Her genuine concern struck me deeper than she could know. Here was a neighbor, a near stranger, showing more care for me than my own son. Come in, Eleanor, I said softly. I'll make us some coffee, and I'll tell you a story you might not believe. Over steaming mugs, I poured out everything: the secret wedding, the humiliation, the years of financial sacrifice, and the confrontation with the lawyer. Eleanor listened silently, nodding from time to time. When I finished, her eyes glistened with empathy. You did the right thing, she said firmly. I went through something almost identical 5 years ago with my daughter. I thought it was my duty to fund her life. I thought if I stopped, she'd stop loving me. But when I cut her off, it forced her to grow. It was awful. At first, threats, guilt trips, blackmail. But after 6 months, she called to apologize. Now we finally have a real relationship, one based on love, not money. Her words planted a seed of hope inside me. Do you think Ethan and Clara will ever understand? I asked. She shrugged gently. Maybe, maybe not. But that's no longer your responsibility. Helen, your responsibility now is to live your own life. That night, for the first time in years, I lay in bed without worrying whether Ethan and Clara had money for rent or groceries. I didn't lie awake planning how to rescue them from their own recklessness. I thought about myself, my plans, my future, and I slept better than I had in a very long time. The next morning, at precisely 8 a.m., Caleb and Mr. Dalton arrived to replace my locks and install the security cameras as they worked. My phone buzzed again and again, different numbers each time. Clara, clearly blocked on her own line, was now borrowing phones to reach me. But I had developed a new skill, complete indifference. I ignored them all. Double quotes, Mrs. Hayes, Caleb said while positioning the cameras. This system will give you peace of mind. You'll be able to see who comes to your door even if you're not home. If anyone tries to break in, the police will be alerted automatically. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was protecting myself from my own child. But strangely, it didn't hurt, it just felt necessary. While they finished, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I picked up the phone and called my sister Marianne in Denver. When she answered, her voice was startled. "Helen, my goodness, it's been months. How are you?" "I'm good," I told her. "Better than I've been in years. And I need to tell you why." I poured everything out. The secret wedding, the humiliation, the legal threats, my decision to cut Ethan and Clara off. Marianne listened quietly until I finished. "Oh, Helen," she sighed. "It's about time." Every time we spoke, it broke my heart hearing you brag about how much money you gave them, as if that was proof of love. I never knew how to tell you. Ethan never spoke about you with affection. He'd say, "My mom paid for this," or "My mom covered that," but never, "I miss her," or "I love her," to him. You were more of a service than a mother. Her words hurt, but they also cleansed me like disinfecting a wound. And Clara? I asked. Marianne hesitated. She always talked about you in the future tense. When Helen is gone, we'll remodel her house. When we inherit, we'll invest, as if you were just temporary, as if your death was their life plan. The truth hit like a cold wave. They hadn't just seen me as a teammate, they had seen me as an obstacle, biding time until I was gone. Later that afternoon, Eleanor knocked on my door, holding a fresh mug of coffee. "I thought you might need company," she said warmly. We sat together in my living room. She shared more of her story, the phrases her daughter had once used on her. "You're like a second mom to me. We're special. Everything will be ours one day." I laughed bitterly. "Do you think there's a handbook for manipulation?" "Not officially," she chuckled, "but it sure feels like it. Chapter 1, make her feel indispensable. Chapter 2, create constant financial emergencies. Chapter 3, when she resists, question her sanity." We laughed, but it was laughter lined with pain. "Did you feel guilty at first, cutting your daughter off?" I asked. "Every day for 3 months," Eleanor admitted. "But then I saw the changes. She got a second job. Her husband stepped up. They learned to survive. And eventually, they learned I was a person, not a paycheck." Her honesty strengthened me. That evening, I did something else I had put off for years. I visited my husband Robert's grave. The cemetery was quiet, the grass cool under my knees. His headstone looked neglected from my long absence. "Robert," I whispered, "I think I lost myself after you left." I poured everything into Ethan, thinking I could fill the void. But I forgot how to be me. Our son, he's not the boy you once knew. Or maybe he is, and I just refuse to see it. He and Clara took everything you left for me, and I let them. But not anymore. I stayed for hours, cleaning the stone, replacing the flowers, and talking to him as though he were listening. For the first time in years, I left without rushing home to solve Ethan and Clara's crises, but when I pulled into my driveway, my heart froze. 3 cars sat in front again, Ethan's, Clara's, and 2 others I didn't recognize. I stayed in my car, watching through my new cameras. They were pacing, pointing at my house, clearly agitated. I called Mr. Whitman immediately. "They're here again. With more people. Stay inside," he instructed. "I'm on my way and I'm calling the police. The restraining order was approved this morning. They're not allowed on your property." Within minutes, Mr. Whitman and 2 patrol cars arrived. I watched from inside as officers confronted Ethan and Clara. Ethan waved his arms, shouting. Clara cried her practice tears. One officer approached me. Ma'am, it's safe to come out. They'll be leaving now. As I stepped onto the porch, Ethan shouted across the yard. Mom, this is ridiculous. We're your family. You can't call the police on your own son. I looked at him steadily. Family doesn't bring lawyers to declare their mother incompetent. Family doesn't break into her home and rifle through her papers. Family doesn't treat her like an ATM. Clara's voice rose from the sidewalk. You'll regret this, Helen. You owe us, we signed bills together. You can't abandon us now. Mr. Whitman cut in firmly. Any future communication will go through my office. And I suggest you get legal advice before making threats, because my client has every receipt of her so-called support. I watched them drive off. Furious but defeated, for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't in confidence. That evening, Eleanor invited me to dinner at her home. I met her daughter polite, warm, respectful. I watched the 2 of them laugh, share stories, ask each other about their day. The daughter never once asked for money. Tears stung my eyes. I wanted this with Ethan too, I whispered to Eleanor later. Maybe someday you will, she said gently. But first, he has to learn you're a person who deserves respect, not a bank account. Her words stayed with me. The next few days passed quietly. My cameras showed Ethan and Clara circling the neighborhood, sometimes stopping, sometimes just driving by. Mr. Whitman had advised me to log each visit, so I kept detailed records. Their persistence only helps us, he explained. Each violation strengthens our case for a permanent order. On Friday morning, the doorbell rang. Through the camera, I saw a young woman in a suit, holding a folder and smiling politely. Good morning, Mrs. Hayes, she said when I answered. I'm Miss Schmidt from the Office of Senior Services. We've received reports you may be at risk. I need to conduct a wellness check. My blood ran cold. Ethan and Clara had escalated things again. Can I see your ID? I asked, my voice steady. She showed it, and it looked genuine. I just need to ask a few questions. May I come in? I let her, knowing refusal might worsen things. She sat in my living room, pen poised. Double quotes, Mrs. Hayes. We've been told you've shown erratic financial behavior, cutting off your family, installing unnecessary security, refusing medical or legal help. They say you may be showing signs of paranoia. Every word was designed to make me sound unhinged. Clara's touch was obvious. Miss Schmidt, I said firmly, I want my lawyer present before I answer anything. This isn't an interrogation, she countered smoothly. If you have nothing to hide, that phrase infuriated me. Then you can wait, I said, pulling out my phone. Within 20 minutes, Mr. Whitman arrived. His expression hardened as he saw her. Miss Schmidt, unless you have a court order, this is harassment. My client is under representation. If you want to investigate, you'll need to explain why the same family who excluded her from their wedding is now reporting her as mentally unfit. He laid out my documented history, every dollar I had given, every manipulation, every trespass. Miss Schmidt's pen slowed. Her confidence faltered. Mrs. Hayes, she asked finally, do you handle your own finances? I opened my files, perfectly managed bank statements, taxes, investments. Do you live independently? I drive. I cook. I maintain my home. I have friends. I am fine. By the end, she closed her folder. I see no cause for intervention here. Case closed. After she left, Mr. Whitman stayed behind. Helen, he said gravely, this won't stop. They're desperate. Their next move will be court. They'll try to get a judge to declare you incompetent. The thought chilled me. My own son dragging me to court, trying to steal my freedom. Sure enough, weeks later, Mr. Whitman arrived with the news. Ethan and Clara had filed a formal lawsuit for guardianship. They wanted control of everything. I felt the betrayal like a physical weight. They've even submitted witness statements. He said, Clara, of course. A neighbor, Mr. Davis, and even your pharmacist, Mr. Green. Mr. Green? I gasped. He knows I only take vitamins. We went to see him. He flushed with shame when I confronted him. Clara said it was for insurance. I signed without reading closely. I'll write a statement correcting it. But Mr. Davis was no help. She's paranoid, he spat. Installing cameras, yelling in the street. Strange visitors. He didn't care about context. That night, I wept, not for the money, but for the son I had lost. For the boy who once hugged me and called me his best friend. Now scheming to strip me of my dignity. The next day, Mr. Whitman arranged an independent evaluation with Dr. Moore. A respected psychiatrist. She spent hours with me, memory tests. Logic puzzles, financial reasoning. At the end. She smiled warmly. Mrs. Hayes, your results are exceptional. You are not only competent, you're sharp. You're stronger than most people half your age. What your family is doing fits a clear pattern. Elder financial exploitation. Her words reassured me, but they also deepened the sadness. That evening, Eleanor gathered our small circle of friends, Cynthia, Maria, Carmen, and Alfreda. Each had their own story of betrayal by children or siblings who saw them as walking wallets. Do you know what hurts the most? I confessed. Not losing the money, realizing the love I thought I had was never real. I bought attention, not affection. Alfreda, wise in her 80s, took my hands. True love, Helen, cannot be bought. If you had to pay for it, it was never love at all. Her words soothed my aching soul. That night, sitting under the stars in my garden, I felt something I hadn't in years hoped. Not because Ethan and Clara would change, but because I finally had. I was no longer their victim. I was free. 3 weeks later, the trial began. I woke up early, slipped into my best black suit, and studied my reflection. For once, I didn't see a tired, invisible woman. I saw someone prepared for battle. Mr. Whitman picked me up and reviewed our plan. Remember, Helen, the burden of proof is on them. They must show you're incompetent. We only need to prove you are not. At the courthouse, I spotted Ethan in a brand new suit, likely bought with money he didn't have. Clara was dressed in black, as though she were attending a funeral, perhaps the funeral of our family bond. When our eyes met, Ethan looked away. Clara, however, stared at me with icy determination. To her, this wasn't about family. It was a business deal. Their lawyer, an older man with an air of smug experience, began his opening statement. His tactic was clear: paint me as a confused, paranoid old woman manipulated by outsiders. Your Honor, he intoned, Mrs. Hayes has shown alarming changes. She abruptly cut off her family financially, installed unnecessary surveillance out of paranoia, and isolated herself under the influence of manipulative neighbors and lawyers. Every word twisted my newfound independence into supposed evidence of decline. Then they called their witnesses. Clara went first. Her performance could have won an award. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she described my mental decline. Your Honor, she sobbed, Helen was always like a second mother to me. Seeing her like this has been devastating. We just want her to get the care she needs. When Mr. Whitman cross-examined, her mask began to crack. Mrs. Clara Hayes, he asked coolly, when was the last time you called my client without asking for money? She faltered. We talked about many things. Can you give us a date? I don't remember. Is it true you and your husband excluded Mrs. Hayes from your wedding? It was a very small ceremony. Did you or did you not tell her that only special people were invited? Her face flushed. Those words were taken out of context. And what context, Mr. Whitman pressed, makes it acceptable to tell a mother she isn't special enough to attend her son's wedding? Clara had no answer. Next, Ethan took the stand. Watching him raise his hand and swear to tell the truth nearly broke me. This was the boy I had raised alone, the boy I had loved more than my own breath. Mom has always been generous, he testified, but lately she's become irrational and hostile. We believe others are influencing her. But under cross-examination, his facade slipped. Mr. Hayes, Mr. Whitman asked, how much money have you received from your mother in the last 3 years? I don't know exactly. Would $33,400 sound accurate? Maybe she's always been generous. How many times have you visited her without requesting money? Silence. Is it true you broke into her home and searched her private documents? We were concerned for her. Is it true you brought a lawyer and pressured her to sign over power of attorney? We only wanted to help manage things. Mr. Hayes, Whitman said coldly, do you believe a 35-year-old man should depend on his 71-year-old mother to pay his rent? Ethan's silence told the court everything. I stood at the witness stand, my hands steady, my heart resolute. Mr. Whitman guided me gently. I told my story. The $33,400 drained over 3 years, the exclusion from the wedding, the constant manipulation, the invasion of my privacy, the legal threats. Mrs. Hayes, he asked finally, why did you stop financially supporting your son and daughter-in-law? Because I realized it wasn't love, I said, my voice clear and strong. It was a transaction. My money was wanted, but I wasn't. I will not buy affection anymore. Do you regret your decision? Yes, I regret not making it sooner. Their lawyer tried to rattle me on cross-examination, but I answered every question with precision. When he suggested my new friends had manipulated me, I replied, no, they respect me without asking for a cent. That's not manipulation. That's friendship. In closing arguments, their lawyer pleaded that I was a vulnerable old woman being misled, but Mr. Whitman's rebuttal was like a hammer. Your Honor, what we have here is not incompetence, it is independence. Not decline, but strength. This lawsuit is not about protection. It is about greed. Judge Miller retired to deliberate. The 2 hours felt like 2 lifetimes. When he finally returned, the courtroom fell silent. After reviewing the evidence, he began, it is clear to this court that Mrs. Helen Hayes is fully competent. Professional evaluations confirm her cognitive health. Her financial choices, while upsetting to her family, are rational and entirely her right. It is equally clear, he continued, that this lawsuit was motivated by financial interest rather than genuine concern. The petition for guardianship is denied in full. Relief flooded me. I had not only defended my independence, I had reclaimed my dignity. As we left the courthouse, I saw Clara whispering furiously to their lawyer. Ethan glanced at me one last time. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw regret. But it didn't matter anymore. That evening, Eleanor hosted a celebration at my house. We toasted to freedom, to justice, to women who refused to be broken. Helen, Alfreda said, lifting her glass, today, you didn't just win a trial. You won your life back. She was right. For the first time in decades, the future was mine alone. They called Mr. Davis, the neighbor who disliked me, as a witness. He testified that I had paranoid behavior because I installed cameras, had visitors, and once raised my voice at Ethan. But under questioning, he admitted he had never actually spoken to me, and his conclusions were based solely on assumptions. Their final witness was Dr. Lehman, who claimed my refusal of a psychiatric exam was proof of mental decline, but Mr. Whitman presented Dr. Moore's full evaluation pages of evidence. proving my cognitive strength. Dr. Lehman's testimony crumbled. Then it was our turn. Mr. Green, my pharmacist, explained how Clara had tricked him into signing a misleading statement. Dr. Moore testified passionately about my excellent mental health. Mr. Dalton, the hardware store owner, confirmed my decisions at the bank were rational and deliberate. Eleanor and the garden club ladies shared how they had seen me thriving, sharper, happier, freer than ever. Finally, it was my time. In the weeks after the trial, I began reshaping my life piece by piece. I sold my old house, the one that carried too many memories of manipulation and intrusion, and moved into a bright apartment near the city center. Half of my money I donated to organizations dedicated to protecting seniors from financial abuse. The other half I saved for myself to finally live the life I had always postponed. I traveled to Italy, something Robert and I had once dreamed of but never managed. I stood under the Sistine Chapel, walked through the streets of Florence, and thought, this is what my years of work were meant for, not wasted on grown children who never valued me. Back home, I joined an art class. I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in decades. Each stroke of color on canvas felt like reclaiming parts of myself I had forgotten existed. Also started volunteering with a local senior support group. When I told them my story, several women nodded, their eyes misty. They too had faced children who drained them dry, who used guilt as a leash. My story gave them courage to say no. I never heard from Ethan and Clara again. Through whispers from relatives, I learned they had been forced to downsize into a smaller apartment. Clara, for the first time in her adult life, had found a job. Ethan had taken extra shifts to cover expenses. Perhaps life would finally teach them the lesson my generosity never could, the dignity of honest work. At night, standing on my new balcony, I would sometimes look up at the stars and think of Robert. You'd be proud, I whispered. I finally stopped letting them use me. I finally remembered who I am. And yet, even with the relief of freedom, there was grief. Not for the money, but for the son I thought I had. For the illusion of love I had clung to for too long. But I let that grief wash over me, knowing it was part of healing. True love, whether from a spouse, a child, or a friend, cannot be bought. It must be given freely. My neighbors became my new family. Eleanor invited me to her garden club, where I met women whose stories echoed mine. Maria, who had to cut off a brother who begged constantly for loans. Carmen, who had ended ties with a daughter who only visited when she needed money. Alfreda, who had rewritten her will after learning her grandchildren viewed her as their retirement plan. Together, we laughed, we cried, and we lifted each other. For the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of being alone. You know what I've learned? I told them one evening, loneliness surrounded by people who don't love you is far worse than being truly alone. At least now, when I sit by myself, I'm in good company. They all nodded knowingly, and we toasted to our freedom. Months later, I returned to Robert's grave, this time not with sorrow, but with peace. I laid down fresh roses and whispered, I've finally done it, my love. I've stopped trying to buy Ethan's affection. I've stopped bleeding myself dry. You left me enough to live with dignity, and I'm finally honoring that. The wind rustled the leaves as though he were answering me. As I walked away, I felt lighter than ever before. I realized then that the Helen who had once begged for scraps of affection was gone. She had been buried the day I slammed that courtroom door shut on Ethan and Clara's schemes. In her place stood anew Helen, one who understood that self-respect is priceless. One quiet evening, Eleanor asked me a question that stayed with me. Double quotes Helen. Do you ever hope Ethan will come back, not for money, but for you? I thought for a long moment before answering. Once, I would have said yes. I used to dream he'd knock on my door, fall into my arms, and say he loved me for who I am. But now, Now I don't wait for that. If he ever comes back truly changed, I'll listen. But I won't beg for it anymore. I've begged enough. Eleanor smiled knowingly. That's freedom, my dear. Not waiting for someone else to define your worth. She was right. I had spent decades defining myself through Ethan's approval. And when that approval never came, I tried to buy it. But money can't purchase love, only loyalty. As thin as paper dot, my life began to fill with joys I had long forgotten. I joined a travel group for seniors, exploring small towns and historic places. I found myself laughing again, making friends who liked me not for what I gave, but for who I was. In one cafe in Vermont, a stranger complimented my smile and said, "You have the look of someone who's finally living her own story." It struck me deeply. That's exactly what I was doing. For years, I had lived Ethan and Clara's story, funding it, supporting it, keeping it alive. Now, I was finally living mine. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I saw a young mother chasing after her toddler. The boy tripped, and she scooped him up. Kissing his scraped knee, I felt a pain in my chest as I remembered Ethan as a little boy, his arms around my neck, his voice saying, "You're the best mom in the world." For a moment, grief washed over me, but instead of breaking, I smiled softly. I had given him love. I had been a good mother. What he chose to do with that love was his path, not mine. Sometimes, letting go means loving yourself enough to stop clinging to what hurts you. The garden club grew into something bigger. With Eleanor's encouragement, we started a support group for seniors who had suffered financial exploitation. We called it the Circle of Strength. Dozens joined, each carrying stories of betrayal. Fathers drained by sons who promised to repay but never did. Mothers stripped of savings by daughters who claimed it's just a loan. Grandparents guilted into giving, until there was nothing left. We weren't just sharing stories. We were healing together. We were showing each other that being used was not the same as being loved. For many, my courtroom victory became a beacon. If I could stand against my own son and daughter-in-law and win, then so could they. One evening, standing before the group, I said words I never thought I would. I once believed that motherhood meant sacrifice without end, that love meant giving until I had nothing left. But now I know real love doesn't demand destruction. Real love builds. It nourishes. It gives back. What I had with Ethan and Clara wasn't love. It was exploitation, and I am no longer ashamed to say it out loud. The room erupted in applause. Tears ran down faces, tears of recognition, of shared pain, of long-suppressed truth finally spoken. That night, as I walked home under the stars, I felt a deep peace. My story wasn't one of tragedy. It was one of rebirth. I had lost a son, yes, but I had gained myself. Now, at 72, I am not the fragile, desperate woman my son tried to paint in court. I am independent. I am whole. I travel. I paint. I laugh with friends. I wake up without dread, without guilt, without the crushing weight of someone else's demands. Sometimes, strangers write to me when they hear my story. They say, "What would you do in Helen's place?" And I tell them the truth. I would do exactly what I did. Because freedom, no matter how late it comes, is worth everything. So here I am, free at last. My name is Helen Hayes, and I have finally learned the most important lesson of all. The only love worth keeping is the love that doesn't come with a price tag. Months passed, and my life continued to bloom. I painted nearly every day, filling my apartment with colors that reflected the emotions I had once kept buried, deep blues of sorrow, fiery reds of anger, bright yellows of freedom, and soft greens of peace. Visitors often asked, "Where did you learn to paint like this?" And I always answered, "I learned when I stopped living for others and started living for myself." I also began mentoring younger women daughters, nieces, neighbors, teaching them the warning signs of manipulation. Don't confuse love with obligation, I told them, and never confuse gifts with proof of affection. If someone truly loves you, they'll love you even when you give nothing. Occasionally, news of Ethan and Clara trickled back to me through extended relatives. I heard their apartment was foreclosed, their car repossessed. Clara had quit her job after only 6 months, claiming it was too stressful. Ethan had started driving deliveries at night to scrape by once. A cousin told me Ethan had said bitterly, if Mom had just helped us a little longer, we'd be fine. I smiled sadly when I heard that, because the truth was I had already helped him for decades, and he had mistaken dependence for love. Still, I felt no desire for revenge, only pity. On my 73rd birthday, Eleanor and the ladies from our circle of strength threw me a small surprise party. Balloons, a cake, and a card signed by every member. When I blew out the candles, I didn't wish for Ethan to come back. I didn't wish for Clara to apologize. I didn't wish for anything from anyone. I simply wished for one thing, to never again forget my own worth. And for the first time in years, I knew that wish would come true because I was the one making it happen. One spring morning, I sat in my garden, the sun warming my face. A robin landed on the bird bath, splashing in delight. I closed my eyes and thought of Robert, of the life we had built, of the years I had lost to grief and misguided devotion. But then I thought of the years ahead. They weren't filled with fear anymore. They were filled with possibility. I wasn't a victim of Ethan and Clara. I wasn't a confused old woman. I wasn't a discarded mother. I was Helen Hayes, independent, free, whole. And that truth was stronger than any betrayal. So, if you are listening to my story now, if you are someone who feels drained, unappreciated, invisible, I want you to hear me. Clearly, you do not have to buy love. You do not have to destroy yourself to prove your worth, and you do not have to tolerate people who treat you as anything less than special, because here's the greatest lesson I've learned. The most special person in your life must be you. I once believed I wasn't special enough to be invited to my own son's wedding, but now I know better. I am special because I survived, because I found my strength, because I chose myself. And that choice, above all else, has set me free.